Hi everyone, warm welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session on From Seats to Outcomes, Rethinking SaaS Pricing in the AI era. We are so glad that you could join us today. Before we begin, we'll introduce ourselves. So I am Rahul Gehani. I'm a partner with Hebis Group. I specialize in helping enterprises maximize the value from their contracts with technology vendors as well as tech. For the time being, I hand over the baton to my colleague Dattatreya. Uh, Dattatreya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rahul. Hello, everyone. I'm Dattatreya Jaina, also known as DJ. I'm a practice director with Everest Group, been with the firm for more than a couple of years now. So me and my team, we work closely with the product and pricing management teams across the different software providers and advise them on how they can optimize their overall product pricing and strategy. So welcome again and looking forward for a meaningful conversation today. And for your information, I'm joining in from Gurgaon in India.
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention that, DJ. Likewise, I'm also joining in from Gurgaon, India, where the weather is very rainy currently. Would be good to know where our audience is joining in from. So request everybody to type in the chat, where are you joining from and also how's the weather over there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it has been raining quite heavily here since morning, so and it's expected that it will continue for the few more days. So it's going to be a rainy day for us.
Yes. Okay, let's jump into the discussion. So, for more than 2 decades, the SaaS industry was built around a relatively stable commercial formula. A SaaS vendor sold subscriptions. Subscriptions were usually linked to the number of users or seats, and revenue grew when customers added to their employee base, or adopted additional modules of the SaaS product, or even when they upgraded to the higher product tiers. Uh, and over a period of time, this model became very successful. When we look at what is the share of SaaS, in the overall technology spend of enterprises, that number has steadily gone every year. So, in general, it has been a very successful model that the SaaS vendors have adopted. But AI is beginning to change many assumptions behind this. An AI assistant may make one employee, the client, as productive as several employees who did not have access to AI. And an autonomous agent in the environment may execute thousands of tasks without being assigned a conventional user seat. So a customer may receive substantial value from a platform, even if there are actually only a small number of human FTEs or human people logging in. At the same time, the provider's cost to serve the customer may increase every time an AI model generates an answer, processes a document, or launches an agentic workflow, or invokes a third-party model source. Uh, so, the old relationship between users, usage, cost, value, from the perspective of the tech vendors, it's becoming very, very difficult to maintain. DJ, what are your views on this? And do you think that AI essentially signals the end of seat-based pricing?
Uh, Thanks, Rahul, and a very pertinent question in today's world. So, I mean, my point of view is that I would not describe this as the immediate end of a per seat-based pricing. The seat-based pricing is still going to be there. It's going to be relevant for some categories of the software. And the simple reason is that it brings predictability, simplicity, and then a familiar basis for budgeting. So while the seat-based pricing is still going to be there, but what we're certainly seeing is that the assumption that per seat pricing is going to be the default for every software product, that is going to change. So AI definitely is exposing that structural weakness that was always present in seat-based pricing. And that's where a seat which was initially kind of linked to the value delivered, nowadays in today's scenario, it's not very applicable, right? So, for example, let's say a customer might reduce the number of people for performing a process or performing a certain task by increasing the amount of output or amount of work that gets completed through a software. So, under a pure seat-based model, the provider could create substantially more value, right, for the client. But at the same time, the revenue they're generating is very less because of the simple reason that the number of people has decreased. So that way, the seat-based pricing may not be a very good choice in some of the categories. But having said that, let's also look at the factors that led to the decline of seat-based pricing. So the first one that we can see is the slower seat expansion. So for many SaaS providers, the growth model was based on a simple equation, right? So let's say they used to acquire a customer, land in one particular department or one particular business unit, add more users, sell additional modules, increase the prices at the renewal. And they used to follow this model for multiple years. And that formula was effective when the customers were growing the headcount and digitizing the previously manual functions. But nowadays, as we are seeing multiple enterprises, they are going through layoffs. They're scrutinizing the headcount that was there. They're going through vendor consolidation. They're using AI to increase the output of the existing teams. So as a result, what is happening is the employee growth and then the software revenue growth are no longer moving together as reliably as they once used to do. And reliance on the per seat model has also led to many SaaS providers hiking the per seat pricing over the last 2-3 years. So we have seen multiple vendors, multiple large vendors such as IBM, Microsoft, Salesforce, Atlassian, etc. They have increased the prices by more than 10% in the last few years, right? So for many SKUs, and some of the SKUs have increased it in excess of 20% as well. So when the providers are not able to change this sort of the model, so what they do is they end up ultimately increasing the price, which in turn impacts the enterprise buyer. Right? So that is definitely the first challenge which is being faced, which is resulting in the decline in the per seat pricing. The other one is around the software rationalization. So let's say 10 years back, when the SaaS was expanding, the SaaS boom period was there. Most of the organizations, what they had done is they had accumulated a lot of overlapping tools. So for some categories, for example, let's say the collaboration platform, the analytic products, automation tools, the different kind of point solutions that are there, they used to have several products which used to basically do the same sort of functionality. But nowadays, buyers obviously have become very smart, and they're asking, do they need all these applications? How would these applications be genuinely differentiated? What capabilities can be consolidated in the strategic platforms? What are the tools that have been showing low adoption? So things like that. So there are multiple questions around the utilization which the buyers are raising, and that's where some of the platforms which used to follow a seed-based model, they get knocked out of the customer's software estate. So that is another one, the rationalization. The third one is around the changing cost structure. Now, again, if we compare, let's say, the SaaS economics in the previous years, it won't cost much to a SaaS provider to add, let's say, an additional user into their overall portfolio. It used to be a very simple nominal cost they used to get. But now with AI coming in, when let's say an additional user started using AI features, so there are a lot of these usage-based economics comes into picture. The tokens are being used or the credits are getting consumed. So definitely from a cost point of view, the provider, they are certainly they have to spend more to give that value to the customers. So that is again one of the reasons why the seed-based pricing does not actually tie up to the current way that the different softwares are being consumed. So, for example, let's say a vendor that includes unlimited AI usage. So there are different ways nowadays we are seeing the vendors are offering the AI features in their products. So some may include unlimited AI usage in a fixed subscription in order to encourage the adoption. but at the end of the day, it can expose itself to significant gross margin risk, right? Because ultimately the cost is increasing, so the margins are getting affected. Similarly, on the contrary, if let's say the vendor is passing every unit of consumption directly to the customer to protect its margin, but so that again is not going to work because it creates budget anxiety and then they discourage the usage. So the provider has to balance the three options, because adoption, predictability, and unit economics, in order to be more valuable to the end client. Similarly, the fourth one that we are discussing here is around the commoditization of the individual features, which is nothing but how easily replicable how the AI features can be. So let's take an example of a simple, let's say, AI assistant or a chatbot. Nowadays, almost every product is doing that. Almost every software vendor is offering that kind of a feature. So that is definitely not a differentiator going forward. And if you are charging, let's say, a 10% increase or 20% increase in the price because of that, that the customer may not be very happy with that kind of a model. So that kind of shift the conversation from features to performance. And then the last one is, how do you prove the measurable business impact, right? So again, like going back to the second point, like we were discussing about the software rationalization, the buyers have become more careful about the shelfware that is there. Customers have spent, yeah, I mean, from a customer point of view, they have spent years paying for licenses that were assigned but not actively used. So procurement and finance teams now have better visibility into the application utilization. AI makes the issue even more visible, right? So a buyer may ask why it should purchase AI for every employee when only a portion of the workforce is now has an appropriate use case. Therefore, these kind of challenges are taken into consideration to come up with a well-designed pricing model. And from a the objective point of view, what a well-designed pricing model should do is it should systematically avoid making the customer pay heavily for underutilized functionality or licenses, and it should avoid penalizing the provider for making the customer more efficient. So, Rahul, I mean, I spoke about multiple problems that are associated with the seed-based pricing, but do you see there are some scenarios are there in which seed-based models are still relevant?
Yeah, definitely. See, I think seat-based pricing still works, when the number of users, the number of seats remain a reasonable measure of access and value for enterprise for the time. Consider, let's say, categories of software where every user receives a distinct identity or distinct workspace. Collaboration among named users is key to the appeal of the product, and it adds value to the time. Security permissions are important. Auditability is important. Usage is more or less uniform across different types of users. The marginal costs associated with each additional user are kind of predictable, stable, and
Yeah.
the customer really values predictable budgeting. So in all such situations, price per seat or price per user can still remain, an appropriate price metric. So in my opinion, the mistake is not using this kind of model.
So,
Mistake is actually
sorry, Rahul. I think there is some issue in your some network issues, audio issues at your end. Your voice is not coming clearly, but I understand most of it. So, the initial part where you described like what are the different scenarios in which your seed-based pricing is still applicable. So I totally understand that. So basically, what we are trying to yeah. So basically, what you're trying to say here is that the mistake is basically not using the seats, but rather the mistake is using the seats without aligning to the value. So I think what providers need to think or think about, what they should consider is that how even using the offering a seat-based model, how they can still go ahead and offer value to the client, and that's where uh, it's very important to understand what the models entail. right? So, and then again, once you join back, maybe you can share your views as well. But what there are different metrics which should be considered while doing while kind of doing the seed, whether what kind basically deciding the pricing model, what should come up with, right? So basically, it should correlate with the customer value, as we have been discussing. That it should be easier to understand, right? So if we are offering the client a metric which is very difficult to understand, let's say a token. So a token, I mean, the definition of token again is different for different kind of providers. So there's no standard definition, and even from a client perspective, also it is difficult for them to understand what a token is or how it is getting consumed, or even to measure it. So they should be offered some sort of a metric which is easier to understand, measurable, and auditable. I think that's where it is important from a provider point of view to consider all these factors. Now, the other one which I feel is important is around the predictable budgeting. So it needs to be, I mean, the seed-based pricing, as we have been discussing, it used to offer predictability to the clients. But now, with AI and other thing coming in, it should the customers need reasonable visibility to the future spending as well. So the providers need to think of a model which offers that visibility or the predictability, and at the same time is sort of revenue generating for them. So it's kind of a hybrid that they should think about. So these are some of the factors, some of the metrics which I could think of. And now that you have joined back, why don't you share some more if you feel that those can be relevant from a pricing metrics point of view?
Okay. So I think we've covered quite a bit of that, DJ. First of all, I hope my audio is better now.
Yeah, it is much better.
Okay, great. So I think we've covered many of the things, from what I could listen to, talked about customer value, we talked about the ease of understanding, we talked about the fact that the metric should be measurable and auditable, it should support the budgeting, which is easy and predictable, for the end client. And lastly, it should produce sustainable unit economics, from the provider's standpoint, so the revenue generated should scale appropriately with the delivery costs, and service obligations of the tech vendor. One way to look at it is that pricing design is all about selecting the least imperfect metric, because let's face it, every choice of a pricing model or of a pricing metric has its pros and cons, Uh, so whichever is the least imperfect one, for the provider and the clients, that's the right model. Let's do one thing. Let's talk about some of the common pricing models that are prevalent in the market today. And what are the pros and cons, So first of all, we have uh, the standard user-based pricing model, where it's priced per seat basis, per user basis, one of the heaviest used models as of now. Because of some of the things that we just discussed, we kind of believe that going forward, enterprises and the tech vendors, they're gonna start looking for other pricing models. Now, which are those other ones? So we also have the subscription-based models, which essentially provide a time-based access to the client, and it also has, pricing for additional features or capabilities. It's one of the more commonly used models as of now. We expect to see that remaining pretty relevant for SaaS products. Third one is basically what we call as the consumption or usage-based pricing. Over here, the customer pays for the number of units which are getting consumed. And those units could include things like API calls, number of documents processed, number of transactions processed, or it could have, some technical related metrics. For example, the compute time or the number of tokens that were utilized, the number of messages, It could also be process or workflow oriented. So things like number of workflow runs, or number of agent actions, or the volume of the data. All of these are different types of examples, of consumption or usage-based pricing. Activity, and from the enterprise perspective, it kind of lowers the barriers to adoption. It can introduce volatility though. Customers may struggle to forecast their bills effectively, and we have heard so many stories recently where estimates around number of tokens being utilized, that was they were clearly wrong, and within a few days or within a few weeks, enterprises were kind of burning the entire amount they had budgeted, for the number of tokens to be consumed. So it's going to be difficult for customers to really forecast effectively. And on the other hand, the SaaS vendors may struggle to forecast the revenue. The fourth pricing model is basically what we call as transaction-based pricing. And this is essentially this is a variant of usage-based pricing. The customer basically pays for a recognizable unit, such as an invoice getting processed, or a payment getting completed, or the number of shipments, which have got optimized using the AI functionality of a software. From an HR standpoint, it could be, let's say, things like number of candidates which are getting screened, or from a insurance perspective, number of claims that are getting reviewed and adjudicated. Um, Example from the customer experience side, number of support cases, getting resolved. So, in all of these cases, the transaction metrics are often easier for customers to understand than the SaaS providers parlance, or lingo, which is essentially IT infrastructure oriented. However, the provider needs to ensure, or the SaaS vendor needs to ensure, that each transaction has a reasonably consistent value for the client and cost, for it to service. If you see on the slide, the next pricing model is essentially what we call as hybrid. Sorry, the last one, which we see over here, is what we call as a hybrid model. That's the one where it's essentially a combination of some other pricing models, which we have already talked about. For example, it could be a platform fee plus consumption-based charges. It could be a seed fee plus AI credits, a minimum annual commitment plus overage for additional usage, subscription-based pricing plus an additional fee per completed transaction. So all of these are examples of hybrid pricing. They are largely emerging because they allow the SaaS vendors to balance several objectives other than optimizing for, let's say, only one of them. Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention the outcome-based model, which we also see over here. So in outcome-based model, essentially the client pays when a defined result is achieved. For example, a support case getting resolved without human intervention, or when there is, let's say, revenue recovery because of usage of the SaaS software, or prevention of fraud because of the software. It could also lead to, let's say, some savings for the organization, or generation of qualified leads in the sales process, avoidance of downtime, of certain systems. So all of these are valuable business outcomes. And then, if the fee is getting linked to all of these, then it's an example of outcome based. As of now, this is the model which is least prevalent. But as we discussed, when clients are looking to pay not for metrics which are relevant from the provider's perspective, but when they are trying to pay for the actual value which is derived, the outcome-based models become really relevant. And going forward, we see outlook for this one to be strong as well. So I realize I've been speaking nonstop for a few minutes now. I'll kind of shut up on this particular point. Uh, on a different note, just want to let our audience know that all of you can download our primer on navigating the new SaaS reality, trends, challenges, and winning strategies for tech providers by clicking on the link, that will pop up on your screen in a short while. Okay, we see the link has come up, so feel free to click on it. You can also scan the QR code actually to get to go to the link. DJ, a question for you. So outcome-based pricing, which I just mentioned, there has been talk around this for decades now. And
Yeah.
many people see this as the holy grail of software monetization. But very few providers have actually been able to execute it successfully and at scale. So why is it so attractive and yet so difficult?
Right, Rahul. So, the main reason why it is considered the holy grail is because it promises perfect alignment for both from a provider standpoint as well as from the customer standpoint, right? So, from a provider standpoint, they get rewarded when the customer succeeds, and then from a customer standpoint, they pay for the realized value rather than just an access to the tool. So from the conversation kind of shifts from like how many users do you need to what business result are we jointly trying to achieve. So that's the kind of shift that outcome-based pricing promises. And even from a budget point of view, also it can unlock larger budgets. For example, let's say when we are procuring a software, or rather a client is procuring a software, they typically purchase it from the IT software budget. But when an AI solution comes into the picture, that demonstrates, let's say, reduced operational costs, or let's say some bit of a transformation and things like that. So they can also get budgets from transformation operations or even labor related budgets. So that's the kind of promise which also outcome-based pricing offers. But then going back to your question, why, if it is so beneficial theoretically, why it's not been actually implemented on the ground? So it's because there are challenges, right? So the first one is around the articulation. Now, articulating an outcome, like defining an outcome, so that is definitely is a much bigger challenge. So typically if we assign it to, let's say, a business outcome, let's say customer satisfaction and all, so measuring those outcomes, defining those outcomes has been a challenge traditionally, right? So if I have to talk about a measurable outcome, a strong metric would be, let's say, the number of customer support cases that were fully resolved by an AI agent without human intervention, subject to, let's say, agreed quality and customer satisfaction thresholds. But if we relate to, let's say, a profitability, overall customers' overall profitability, that is not an outcome that can be easily attributed to only the software contributing to that factor. So there can be multiple other things which are considered when the profitability is increasing. So that's where that articulation is definitely one of the key challenges which providers face in defining outcome-based pricing. The other one, like was mentioning regarding about the profitability example, so there might be multiple factors into play when the outcome is delivered. So the value and the risk attribution also plays an important role. So let's say the farther the outcome is from the direct action of the product, the harder it becomes to isolate the provider's contribution. In a fixed subscription model, the customer carries much of the adoption risk. But when it comes to an outcome-based model, the the provider assumes more of it. That may be appropriate when the provider has, let's say, a strong control over the result, but it becomes really risky when the success depends on numerous factors on the customer side as well. The third challenge that I would like to highlight is on the timelines. Now, when it comes to outcomes, it's not very, it's not very predictable, right? So the outcome may come after a few months. It can come immediately. So it's not a well-defined timeline that is there when it comes to the outcomes. So that's where from a provider standpoint, in order to get the value of the product they have implemented in the customer premises, they will have to wait for irregular amount of time intervals. So that's again one of the challenges which they have seen. uh, Similarly, on the consistency as well, or the kind of control they can have on the outcomes. Again, because of multiple factors, the outcome can get impacted, right? So it may not the outcome that the software or let's say a AI agent generates, that may be inconsistent. It may not be very consistent. So that again leads to the challenge. So these are some of the challenges that definitely outcome based pricing brings along with it. So if you see on the screen, some of the challenges are listed. Uh, what we feel is that outcome based pricing will work perfectly if all those boxes are ticked, but unfortunately there is one or more than one boxes which is always left unticked, and that's where outcome based pricing becomes a little bit riskier proposition. As of now, things might change in future as we move forward, but as of now it's becoming a little bit riskier from a provider perspective. So Rahul, again, while we have been discussing so far from a provider perspective, like we spoke about the pricing models, we spoke about outcome-based pricing, seed-based models, etc. But when it comes to buyers, so what exactly are they expecting in the AI era? You want to throw some light on
Yes,
that?
sure. I'll just talk about it, and also saw the question from Ranabir. So he's asking, uh, do you foresee in the near future AI hyperscalers making the pivot from license-based to other models? If yes, what would this model be like? So interesting question. We'll kind of talk about that a bit more in a few minutes. But if I have to share a quick response to that, Ranabir, see, we don't think the licenses are going away anytime soon because they are still a simple and predictable way for customers to buy software. But what we do see happening is vendors layering some other pricing metrics on top of the licenses. For example, AI usage or agent activity or number of workflows which have been processed, or hopefully even outcomes, where they can be measured reliably. So we don't think that there's going to be a shift away from licenses altogether, but it's more likely going to be a shift beyond the licenses to the hybrid pricing models. So that's the expectation that we have. And jumping back to what you asked, PJ. So with regard to how are buyer expectations changing in the AI era? We have the slide up. The first change that buyers can expect is for AI to be essentially part of the core part of a product, as opposed to being, let's say, an expensive add-on. Providers need to distinguish between what are the table stakes features, such as smarter search and differentiated capabilities, such as autonomous agents that can complete entire business processes and can therefore justify the separate pricing between the two. So the important distinction is enhancement versus value producing products. Second change that we can expect is essentially more evidence before enterprise-wide commitment. So essentially, some kind of a proof of value in terms of the value delivered from a limited pilot, let's say for a single business unit, or let's say initial subscription which has some level of capped usage which is allowed before the enterprise goes in for a more comprehensive subscription, or let's say utilization of the product for a defined use case for a short contractual period. All of these are different ways in which essentially the proof of value can be discovered. The buyer is not merely asking for, let's say, proof whether the AI works. Because the AI may definitely work, but does the underlying economics, does that make sense? That's what we see buyers being most concerned with as of now. The third change is essentially the expansion of the buying committee on the, on the client side. So software procurement has increasingly become more cross-functional, and that's even more true for the AI products. So procurement needs to weigh in, the finance needs to weigh in because certainty of the spend is something which finance has very close eyes on currently. IT needs to weigh in. Uh, the security aspects of it, the privacy aspects of it are very, very important. Hence, legal is an extremely important stakeholder group. Then, there would be the data governance teams, there would be business leadership, a very important set of stakeholders, So all of them are more likely to participate in decisions around AI going forward. Our current research indicates that software purchasing authority is increasingly distributed across functions, while buyers continue to cite uh, aspects such as return on investment, compliance, usability as adoption concern. The fourth change that we are kind of talking about over here is essentially greater demand for
Greater
pricing transparency.
pricing transparency.
Okay, Nicole.
So,
So essentially, buyers want to understand what triggers a charge, how is the usage measured, what happens when the limit is exceeded, or can the provider actually change the unit definition? So, how will costs scale up in future? Whether the unused commitments roll over or do they get expired? Whether the usage can be capped or not? So all of these are very important uh, aspects with regard to transparency in the minds of the buyers. And the fifth important dimension is the preference for commercial flexibility. So essentially, a large number of buyers now prefer variable pricing, for generative as well as agentic AI solutions. That does not mean that there needs to be unlimited variance in the pricing, so it has to be an adequate mix of flexibility and control. So not completely fixed pricing, but also nothing which is going to cause shocks to the CFO. And we see all of these essentially can be achieved meaningfully by different mechanisms such as commitments, minimum commitments with discounted rates, well-defined usage bands, caps for the spending, alerts, when let's say the caps are being approached, the provision to roll over uh, the number of licenses or availability of licenses, proper discounting schedules on account of moving from one volume band to another volume band. Very importantly, things like ramp up schedules as well as benchmarking rights to really understand whether the prices being paid are in line with the market uh, contemporary market practices or not. And lastly, termination rights. If let's say the value thresholds are not being realized by the enterprise, then the ease of terminating, a particular contract. So all of these are important factors to be taken into consideration while coming up with a pricing strategy. And in our opinion, all the tech vendors should think about all of these aspects with a much greater degree of flexibility as compared to what we have seen in the past. I'll kind of take it back to DJ now. DJ, while we focus on the what aspects, we should also talk about who are the people responsible for this change. Uh, and how can the software strategy be aligned to some of these recent developments that we have seen? What are the different types of operating model changes, which the tech vendors should aim to have internally?
Sure, Rahul. And again, a very, very great question and a very valid question in today's scenario because There is a myth going out there. There is a misconception out there that only the pricing team is responsible, because so far whatever we have spoken about, the pricing model, the pricing metrics, and so on and so forth, there is a misconception that only the pricing team is responsible for this kind of a transformation. But then the truth is very different to that. So there are more stakeholders involved who will be equally working hand in hand with the pricing team in order to bring about this kind of a transformation. So if I have to name a few teams, for the product team, definitely they are the main, I would say the main, one of the main stakeholders, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are creating these kind of features. And then they have to understand how the meters that can be embedded, the telemetry to track the usage, the cost, value, limits, entitlements, etc. So that is something which they should care about. Similarly, the finance teams. Now, again, like we were speaking about the different cost that comes with AI features or AI modules. So the finance team must model the revenue variability, what kind of margins they should think about, because traditionally SaaS vendors used to enjoy very high margins, 70, 80, 90% in some cases. But nowadays with AI coming in, that kind of margin is obviously is a very, I would say a very upper limit for some of the providers. They will have to bring down the margins to do that in investments. And that's where the finance team plays an important role in deciding what kind of margins they should maintain. Similarly, if I have to look at the sales team, they will have to shift from selling features to diagnosing workflows, the baselines, outcomes, risks, etc. Right. So because that's what even nowadays, and I think Rahul, you also touched upon in your response to some extent, that's what the buyers are expecting. They're expecting outcomes. They're expecting out how the tool is going to add value at the end of the day. So the sales team must change their pitch accordingly. Similarly, the customer success team, let's say the product is sold, the customer success team, they will be responsible for increasing the adoption, drive activation, value realization, etc. So they also play an important role. And then the sales team and then the customer success team, they have to go again collaborate in terms of, let's say, if it's a new client or it's an existing client. So how the value can be delivered to them, they will have to discuss well in that. Similarly, legal team with AI, definitely it comes a lot of risks around that. So they must define the measure, what kind of rules needs to be there, what kind of guardrails needs to be included in the terms and conditions, the responsibilities, the liabilities, etc., so on and so forth. So all those factors needs to be taken care by the legal team. Similarly, if, like I mentioned, in that from a sales point of view, so they have to change their strategy, like how they would sell their features to the client. So that's where their compensation also needs to be adjusted accordingly. So they have to be the reward has to be tied to the kind of the outcome they are able to sell to the client. Right. So these are the different factors these are different teams rather who contribute along with the pricing team in order to bring about this transformation. And if I have to talk specifically about AI, the buyers definitely want to know the value of the business benefits they can expect. And if the tech vendor is willing to put their revenue at risk by linking it to the outcomes for their client. And truth be told, we see most of the tech vendors shying away from talking about it. So we have engaged with multiple buyers in the past and one thing that is very evident is that uh, they they have to take a cue from whatever is happening, whatever is from the expectations of the enterprises, and they have to think about like how they can move to a little bit more hybrid or outcome based pricing model. And what they can take a cue from is that their partners in the IT and BPO services space who have really stepped up in trying to understand the client environment and link to a meaningful part of their revenue to the outcomes realized by the clients. So to some extent, the services companies, they have been able to crack that code, and most of the sorts of software providers, they have, let's say, they have a good partner ecosystem from whom they should learn and see how those things can be implemented in their product strategy as well. So, keeping that in mind, let me also touch upon some of the key pitfalls or challenges that tech vendors should definitely avoid. Some of these I think we would have already discussed during the session, but let me highlight a few of the important ones. The first one is the cost unit or the metric, right? So let's say in if you are developing a product or AI agent, and in the base you might be using any of the, let's say, LLM providers, LLM platforms that is there. And most of these platforms, their unit is tokens. Now you can't charge a client using tokens because of the obvious reason that, like we discussed, the definition is not very standard, and from a client perspective, it's not easy to understand as well. So they should the metric which you should propose to the to your end client should be something which is there as part of their jargon and as related to their business, so that they understand it. Similarly, if you're adding an AI feature into your product portfolio, you should not charge, let's say, a blanket premium for that, because the AI features, different AI features have different kind of value that they can deliver. So you should think about what exactly is the value that a particular SKU or module is delivering, and then accordingly you should kind of put that surcharge into that AI feature. Then offering unlimited AI without guardrails. So we have seen some of the providers, they get swayed away by, they want to sell more AI features to the client. They want to get more clients. And what they do is they offer AI features just like that, unlimited usage and all. Although that might accelerate adoption, but from a business standpoint, from a product vendor standpoint, they will take a big hit in their overall margins, and that is not something which is preferred, especially nowadays when a lot of money has to be put in the R&D and other things like that. So unlimited AI without guardrails is definitely a no, which the software provider should avoid. Then creating an incomprehensible credit system also is something which some of the providers should avoid, right? I mean, like we are discussing in the first example regarding the cost unit. So if you have to go back with the credit system, the credit should be tied to a measurable output outcome, and then the customer should be able to understand like what exactly is being measured. So that's how the credit should be tied and attributed. So these are some of the pitfalls which the software provider should avoid. And yeah, I think we have touched upon the what part of it, the who part of it, who is responsible in bringing about the pricing transformation. So I think one part is left, which is about the roadmap, like what it needs to do all these things. We know about the stakeholders who will be involved. We spoke about what needs to be done, but then how it needs to be done. What is a more practical roadmap is something, Rahul, I would ask you. I mean, do you have a view on that? Any thoughts on what is the practical roadmap when it comes to these implementation?
Sure, DJ. And well, the first step of the roadmap is to just make sure that my audio is working fine. So are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I hope it continues to behave properly. So yes, see, we believe there are the following steps, which should basically form the roadmap for all the tech vendors. The first is to segment the portfolio, essentially group their offerings by the user types, kind of infrastructure requirements which are underlying them, the extent of automation, and the orientation towards actual client outcomes. So they need to, I mean, that kind of a logical segmentation is necessary to begin with. Next is to map, the cost, usage, and the value. So identify what drives the cost and what the customers are actually consuming, and ultimately, what are those outcomes which are valuable for the customers. Then it comes to the usage analytics. So reviewing a typical high and extreme usage by consumers, rather than designing for, let's say, the average customer profile only. And the next important element, which is very, very key to all that we have been discussing, is the right pricing metric. So evaluate the different options for the the balance between aligning on value, simplicity, auditability, predictability, as well as from the provider's standpoint, the margin sustainability. And just reiterating what we had talked about initially, there may not be one perfect pricing metric, but what is the one which is least imperfect, which offers the balance of all of these parameters. Next one is to essentially test it out with some customers, and validate whether outcomes are acceptable. This needs, uh, this could actually be followed by running, a bigger pilot, with a broader set of customers. Again, to then look at metrics such as what is the adoption of that particular pricing model. Are they kind of seeing the right number of conversions happening, from let's say other models to this one? What are the underlying margins, which the tech vendor is able to realize, and does it have any bearing on the renewability of that particular software? So all of those are the important parameters to assess during the broader pilots. Lastly, there should be the right governance plans and migration plans. So essentially assigning cross-functional ownership for pricing, for monitoring, exceptions and packaging, as well as facilitating transitions, for the existing customer base. So those are that's in our opinion a practical roadmap in which the SaaS vendors should follow. DJ, we are pretty much at the end of the session, so
Yeah.
what are the closing messages from your side for software vendors?
Okay. So thanks, Rahul, first of all, for that practical roadmap. I think it makes much sense, and that is something which we have seen some of the providers. They have done it in the past as well, and have gotten good results from it. So if I have to conclude, I would like to conclude with maybe 2 or 3 key messages that we have been discussing. So the first one would be, uh, do not abandon the seed-based pricing simply because the market is talking about outcomes. Retain the seed-based model where they remain understandable, predictable, and aligned with the value. We discussed about some of the scenarios where the seed-based pricing still makes sense. So I would request our provider audience to please retain the seed-based model in those scenarios. Going forward, you may try hybrid model, you may try some other, let's say, consumption-based model, but as of now, please retain that. The second one is, do not confuse the consumption with value. So tokens, compute, models, there are different uh, unit or different kind of metrics that are being used. So, but when it comes to the customer facing metrics, they should try to connect as directly as possible to a recognizable business activity. Like an example which we gave is around the successful resolution of a ticket. So that is something which, from a business standpoint, they should be able to recognize, they should be able to relate to it. So you should always try to link your metric into something which is more relatable to the business. The third one is something like the treat pricing as a product and operating system decision rather than just a price point decision. Because at the end of the day, the commercial models that you will be proposing to your clients that affects product architecture, billing, sales, incentives, customer success, financial planning. So multiple teams, multiple stakeholders are getting impacted. Right? So that's where you have to treat it as a whole, as a more holistic decision rather than just a price point decision. So yeah, Rahul, I think those were the 3 main messages to our audience from today's call. Like to understand from you as well if you have to add anything to these.
No, I just like to reiterate one of the points which you had initially mentioned, which is uh, AI pricing transition is not going to be a move from one universal model to another universal model. which is going to be adopted on a blanket basis. What we're going to see is essentially, in our opinion, a move from a relatively standard SaaS model, which was based on number of seats and users, to a more diverse landscape. We will see some products which will perhaps continue to have the same seat-based model, but then there would be others which would now be more amenable to a usage-based or transaction-based approach. And they're going to be those products which charge for the number of agents or the number of workflows in play. Hopefully, there will be a smaller group, which will also successfully charge for the outcomes, which clients are realizing. But mostly, in our opinion, it's going to be a hybrid of one or more of these things. That's the forecast that we have. So, Vijay, thanks for covering up when my audio went bad, and thank you everybody who kind of stayed with us through the end.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.